What you're about to watch may shock you, not because any of the content is actually genuinely shocking, but because I've used subversive editing tactics by chucking my face up on giant billboards in the middle of a busy city, on the side of buildings as well, playing moody music and dimming the lighting. What we are going to do today though is take a really good hard look at the recent Stuff Circuit documentary film Fire and Fury. We're going to pick this thing apart. We're going to go into a bit of detail. This, my friends and family, is the counter argument. It's called Water and Peace. Let's check this out.
In a dystopian future replete with dark colour palettes, screeching trains, echoing voiceover, Fire and Fury is the most one-sided, pervasive piece of filmmaking passing off as unbiased journalism I can remember in the modern age. Set in a dystopian future replete with dark colour palettes, screeching trains, echoing voiceover, and twisted, almost demonic sounding organ music, you'd be forgiven for thinking that Fire and Fury, Stuff.co.nz's latest documentary style hit piece on alternative media in New Zealand, was not the documentary film you came to watch at all, but in fact, the latest Hollywood horror movie. The first image we see of the New Zealand media peeps that are the subject of this film are projected on billboards over the Gotham City-like landscape they have portrayed, a la Orwell's 1984. Damien Dement and Chantal Baker placing them as propaganda agents. This positioning feels somewhat ironic when we consider the producers of the film funded to the tune of 300-odd thousand taxpayer dollars through a government-run agency and their persistently incorrect, biased and often blatantly false information journalism over the past number of years. Researched and made as an investigative journalism piece by Paula Penfold and Louisa Cleave of Stuff, Fire and Fury is the most one-sided, pervasive piece of filmmaking passing off as unbiased journalism I can remember in the modern age. After the Hollywood horror opening, in a few words from Paula, we are greeted by our first expert, who gets a bunch of time to talk on the film, Ed Coper, Australian author of Facts and Other Lies, a look at supposed dis and misinformation the world over, applauded by multiple former Australian PMs and the former chief news executive at CNN, according to the Amazon reviews. And then, while the music continues its harrowing path, we move to images of a bare-shirted lone trumpet-playing protester in Wellington, and we are advised the Wellington protesters' claims that the protest itself was billed as peaceful and loving in response to government measures. It was anything but. Just like that, the entire 3 weeks of the Wellington protest was written off as nothing, shirtless, hippie nutters who ultimately turned violent. The level of scene setting and dark moodiness is unreal. By the time we get to the first part of the conversation with Kate Hanna, director of the Disinformation Project, funny how we see again journalists interviewing themselves, we are treated to the same muted colour scheme wash with a bright window of light shining through in the rear. The level of implied meaning in this film is almost masterful. Before we go further, I must clarify my position on some of these people here. I haven't seen a lot of what Damien Dement has to say, the odd video here or there that has been circulated through Telegram. What I have seen and what he states in the film, I don't think is the way to go about things. I do find it somewhat extreme and confrontational. Likewise, Calvin Alps, as you may know, I had Counter Spin on my show and briefly appeared to comment on this film on their platform. They are nice people. I don't agree with a lot of what Calvin says, or Carlene Heriota, or Amy Benjamin. But do I think they should have the ability to say it? Yes. Do I think these people are dangerous? No, I don't. Watchers are given an introduction to Damien Dement through distorted camera angles and his echoing voice. Then Calvin Alp through a distant TV shot in a dark lounge, showing him from 2005 as he tries his hand at politics. It is not long after this that we hear the first of many references to Trump, as though any association with the former President of the United States, whom over 70 million Americans voted for twice, instantly makes you dangerous. Kate Hannah then proceeds to accuse, as though it is fact, that these people are looking to claim a space of leadership, she says, whatever that means, and then insinuates that Hannah Spear of Counterspin and Carleen Hiriora are duped actors by these white nationalists and Nazis, as their mere presence as women and Māori women means that they are being used to ward off such labels. It is quite something to sit there and listen to. As we continue through, we do hear of some truly shitty things being said by certain individuals, claiming the Christchurch shooting was a false flag, for example, which for anyone that was in the city that day, I personally was evacuated from my office not 200 metres away behind the mosque as I heard shots. It's an awful thing for anyone to hear. Is it legal though? Yes. Free speech means even the speech you truly do not like, and it should be able to exist. We move on to Chantal Baker next, where the main concern of Paula Penfold appears to be the massive audience that Chantal has amassed, and the fact she doesn't trust or appreciate the MSM. The same feeling that well over half the country has, as per recent media trust studies show. We've talked about these in separate reports recently, as one of Chantal's lives is played on a phone and yet another dark and brooding scene. Paula states with horror that her audience had built to the point during the occupation that on the day of the riot, no, not the protest or even the occupation, the riot, her live streams had more than 1 million views. You can't help but get the feeling at this point in the film that the makers are more concerned about the large following than anything actually dangerous or sinister. Next up, we get Alia, Libby and Claire from Voices for Freedom, showing pre-VFF online getting amongst the crochet, knitting and food blogging scene. I initially wondered why this part of their background was covered at all. Then on second watch, I picked up the lead-in point. Paula Penfold then states, seeing an opportunity during the pandemic, using the social media skills they had learned, they formed VFF. One of a number of accusations being made based around intent that had no factual backing. Opinion-based, if you will, but that's minor to what we see next. Back to director of the Disinformation Project, Kate Hannah, who continues to feature heavily throughout the film, where, after describing VFF as yoga mums, sophisticated actors, Paula asks, are they innocuous? To which Kate replies, well, they are very non-innocuous, Paula. They are quite dangerous, she says. As her eyes widen, she continues, because not only have they created a reality in which nobody else is to be trusted, but the messages they are spreading are not just messages about COVID-19 shock horror. A massively false accusation made even more strange when you consider that Kate and her team have supposedly spent countless hours on the various platforms in and amongst the VFF universe for research. My personal experience is an environment that is absolutely nothing like what she has described here, and I'm confident that thousands of you out there can attest to the same thing. VFF encourages free thought and open-mindedness. Further, what's dangerous about messages that aren't about COVID? 18 minutes in now to the film, and Paula tells us there are 2 more individuals they would love to tell us about, but contempt of court laws prohibits them from doing so. Audio was played to Rebecca Kitteridge, Director General of the New Zealand Security Intelligence Service, that we aren't allowed to hear. Her reaction is, it's deeply, deeply shocking, and I think that any reasonable New Zealander would listen to that and be deeply shocked by it. All the while, the twisted organ music continues to play. And that's that. We just have to trust that whatever was in that audio was terrible beyond words. Very quickly, Paula shifts the story back to Trumpism and QAnon. She states it's essential to understand that conspiracy theories like QAnon are feeding their beliefs, whether they realise it or not. Okay, so now we've moved into telling these people why they believe what they do. It's QAnon, because I told you it is. A QAnon description is next, framed against a bright orange and red hellscape backdrop with footage on a crooked TV hanging from a broken building, as though it plays in any part in our alternative media landscape whatsoever. Before moving on to interview Josie with the title of Former Conspiracy Theorist, as though that's an official title. It's when you watch this thing a second or third time, you really come to grips with how weak in its factual backing and quality of interviewees it really is. Josie says 5/8 of not much, before they shift back to Hannah from Counterspin, who states in audio from 2020 that she thinks Trump is doing a great job and is draining the swamp. One of his famous quotes about clearing corruption out of the White House. This is done against a backdrop of more bright orange hellscape, cascading music, escalating in volume, and dirty water going down the drain, using creative license to try their darndest to paint any support of former US President Donald Trump as being pure evil. It's so incredibly disingenuous, it's painful to watch. Trump may say stupid things and may well be a sexist and in some ways a bully, but are all his supporters extreme right-wing conspiracy theorists, and is he evil? No, I don't think so. More commentary on QAnon follows. They are stated as giving the freedom movement the word freedom, according to Ed Koper, and then a very tenuous link is thrown out there as Paula Penfold states, it's such a unifying term that one of our key groups put it in their name. Right, Paula? That must be the same thing then. Wow. Paula then dives into old social media posts and comments as the music shifts to an even more brooding tone, pointing out a member of VFF stating in an online comment that natural immunity is better than vaccine-induced immunity. Shock horror. More shock and awe at the fact the same VFF member posted a video interview where a practicing doctor gives his opinion on natural immunity being part of natural evolution. Inklings of far-left vaccine worship are felt here, as this piece of conversation is again presented as though it's incredibly dangerous. 23 minutes into the film now, Kate Hannah comes back in with some more broad, assumptive, non-factual storytelling, where she paints the picture of someone who might be hesitant about the vaccine, comes to one of these platforms, has their confirmation bias confirmed by someone who's kind and warm, she says, appears erudite. Now that person on that platform can say nearly anything and still be trusted. And so, that's what's taken place. My goodness, the assumption. Paula then backs this up with, once that trust is gained, followers can be carefully taken into new, more radical territory. Against the backdrop of the Capitol protests of January 6, 2021 in the USA, before heading back to QAnon and the said protest, and denouncing any theory at all that there were potential agent provocateurs there, showing another video conversation where this idea is discussed as though that is dangerous. As this film continues to progress, we can see that it is becoming lazy in its denouncement of every single aspect of the freedom movement. If you don't agree with us, it's dangerous. The conversation around agent provocateurs at any large protest, and yes, that includes New Zealand, Wellington, is a normal conversation to have. Throughout history, certain governments at certain times have employed this tactic. There is a huge amount of video evidence to support even just the idea of this. Yet according to the makers of the film, these people are far-right insurrectionists. Not critical thinking individuals who have questions, just questions. Next, Kate Hannah talks fascism history, stating women and health and well-being have always been a big part of fascism movements, before stating that all of the groups we are seeing in New Zealand have features of fascistic ideas around power and control, and then features of white national identity ideas that are related to fascism. Massive reach and opinion-based nonsense. The camaraderie between Paula and Kate starts to show up more here as they obviously get relaxed, both feeding off each other's faux shock and horror. The German-American Dr. Rainer Fulmich grand jury is called out as a sham by the Dean at AUT School of Law, Kylie Quince. Now, fair play here, that trial is nonsense. Before back to Kate to warn of international ideas such as this one coming back and infecting New Zealand. Again, a reach. Platforms such as Gab and Telegram are in the crosshairs next. But again, fair play. Some of the comments highlighted by random watchers, followers mind you,
are pretty terrible, violent, and should be condemned. I would say here, though, that these people are the very small minority, not representative of the movement as a whole, and are just commenters on the media person's post. Nuremberg Code is briefly discussed, with our AUT Dean showing her absolute disgust for any reference to it before Kate makes some claims around her and her colleagues receiving misogynistic and hateful messages, and against the Prime Minister before they use the jab Sinta 2, she's coming for your kids, satirical sign or meme. This sign is a laugh. I've seen it at many protests, and it's exactly that, satire. If Paula and Kate are offended by this or see it as a misogynistic or an attack, then perhaps they should take a look at their levels of sensitivity. It's a joke, people. It's a joke. New Zealand common law movement is talked about. Me personally, I see this part of the movement as actual nonsense and not helpful. Personal opinion. I don't have a huge amount to criticise when it comes to their assessment of the sheriff appointing alternative reality. So we'll move on. Rebecca Kitteridge from the New Zealand Security Intelligence Service then confirms that they are monitoring at around 40 or 50 people who appear to adhere to violent extremist ideology and have the potential to conduct an attack, and that her investigators are telling her the temperature has risen somewhat. Now, I'm on the fence with this, as I don't necessarily trust the government in their judgment of what they see as the temperature rising or what they see as dangerous, but I also think we should be doing all we can to stop any actual true radicals that may be operating in New Zealand to avoid any future attacks like Christchurch. VFF aren't out of the conversation for long, though, as we move further into the film, coming back in with footage from their interview with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., whom they label as a hero of the anti-vaccination movement. Once again, a blatant, biased and lazy opinion that the entire movement is based around anti-vaccination sentiment and discounting a respected author and advocate in one fell swoop. I wonder if they have taken any time to research him or his book, The Real Anthony Fauci. Ed Cooper then comes back in to completely dismiss vaccine injury, and that everyone who states they know someone that has experienced this is just using it as a technique, as per previous vaccine opponents. Paula backs up this dismissal, saying baselessly that numbers discussed online are drastically inflated, without actually showing any real numbers, which you would expect would be standard journalistic practice. But no. We shift into Wellington for the majority of the rest of the film, now 38 minutes into it with 25 to go. Chantal Baker is projected onto a skyscraper back in our dystopian Gotham City, where Paul states in horror that over 400,000 people viewed her video, suggesting people get involved with the convoy before we head into the footage of Wellington. We should soon shift into what I see as the most agenda-driven aspect of this film, where Paula interviews and focuses on two elderly protesters, Ali Evans and Valerie from Mount Maunganui. Ed Cooper pipes in to state that once the relationships between friends and family had been cut due to their beliefs, no, it wouldn't be at all to do with the divisive nature of the mandates and COVID policy in general now, would it? They found common ground with others who shared their extreme beliefs, before cutting directly to Valerie, who states she doesn't call it a vaccine, she calls it a jab. Wow, that's so extreme. Ali and Valerie are easy targets and are pushed into the place that the filmmakers want them to be, with Valerie saying she trusts VFF and that there is no virus. They are made to look stupid and painted as picture representative again of the entire movement. Wholesome Kiwi grands, completely duped by what Kate Hanna then calls in her next statement an alternative media universe. No motivations and biases there, of course, from a person who makes their living in mainstream media, a lot of it funded by the taxpayer. Right, so okay, she can have that opinion, of course, but again, from a journalistic perspective, to not clearly state that or point out the bias is just lazy and agenda-serving. Kate Hanna is not an expert on disinformation. No one is. She's a journalist for Stuff, who made this film. We cut back to the AUT law dean, not commenting on law at all, and stating with authority that the views on colonisation displayed at the protest are incredibly offensive and uncomfortable, and it disgusts her. We are now 44 minutes in, team, only 29 to go. Further footage of Wellington is referenced now, and you guessed it, it's all
from the one side. No shots of the police actions against peaceful protesters as they discuss that first attempt to clear Parliament that we remember on that fateful Thursday. In fact, not even a mention of the punching, indiscriminate pepper spray use and excess force used on so many protesters. Just the actions of the few angry protesters, such as the idiot who drove his car into the crowd of police who were not representative of the protest as a whole. At the very least, you could call it incredibly unbalanced. The film now moves into that horrific last day in Wellington, and the majority of the rest of its 25 minutes is focused on this. We do get comments from Valerie and Ali stating that the police violence was terrifying and not okay, but nothing from the filmmakers. No acknowledgement, no questioning, nothing. Paula Penfold takes a step into vanity filmmaking here, complete with swaying camera to insinuate them escaping through running away. Then Chantal Baker is brought back into the conversation, and her statement to Paula, fully masked, with a cloth mask I might add, as the protest deteriorated, being, "Mainstream media, you started this, it was your propaganda that caused this." A fairly broad statement, sure, but not one without elements of truth. My opinion is that over these past 3 years, mainstream media has indeed been a major factor in fueling division and hatred around the COVID and vaccine narrative and health regulations, and the sentiment, if not the accuracy of this statement, is completely understandable. Paula states after a further few minutes of footage of the most destructive elements of the protest at the end, the most angry, the most vitriolic, that they haven't encountered this kind of hostility anywhere in the world just for doing their job. Now granted, they don't deserve to be abused, they don't deserve to suffer violence, no one does. But there is no self-reflection. None. No questioning why these people feel this way towards them or what's driven them to this point. Put simply, there is no footage of any of the peaceful, unifying, harmonious elements of the protest. None of the police harming their own citizens. It was completely one-sided and biased. Simple. It was lazy and agenda-driven. It was most obvious in this section of the film. The film then covers Chantal and VFF getting together on an interview to discuss the potential that there were chaos agents brought in on the last day to disrupt and discredit the protest with violence. As mentioned previously, this is entirely possible, but at the very least, it's worth a conversation. It's not unusual to talk about these things. Paula gets personal soon after this, calling a group of protesters chasing out a couple of her stuffed colleagues as they say, "Get out!" She calls this violent. Our protester interviewee, Ali, states repeatedly, "I wasn't violent," which the video clip clearly shows she was not, but Paula won't let it go. "How did we get to this point?" she asks. "It is sad, but what can we do?" says Ali. "We could not be violent towards each other," Paula says, before a sharp cut to Kate Hannah stating, "Because it's necessary violence, because it's protective violence." The editing here is one of the more obvious pieces in the film of the creative, agenda-driven license they are taking with this subject matter. Kate indulges her own self-pity here, where she derides how people have been stalking my Twitter, stalking my Instagram, stalking my LinkedIn, stealing my photos, which of course are all online platforms that she has chosen to post on that anyone can access. However, she does say that her personal safety and that of her family's is threatened, which of course I would never, ever agree with. I would condemn. Again, no one deserves that, but we aren't provided any evidence in the doco of this either. As we career towards the end of the film, some outrageous claims come in to rubber stamp the previous hour of spin. Counterspin and Chantal are accused of spreading Russian propaganda spread by QAnon about the war in Ukraine without any video of them actually saying anything, or any evidence to back up such outrageous claims. The video they show of Chantal was just of her saying, "Why aren't MSM looking into this?" Yeah, looks real Russian propaganda-like. Finally, Paula then brings things to a close saying,
"You can predict what they will say, that none of what we've told you is true because we're mainstream media and we can't be trusted. That's why we wanted you to see and hear it all in their own words."
This ignores the fact for the past hour we have been watching their extreme, twisted, idealised version of events as Damien Dement closes out the film on the side of a skyscraper in Wellington with his voice echoing, "No bias there of course. That was our breakdown of Fire and Fury. I hope you have enjoyed it, team. Took a bit to get together, but I've enjoyed doing so. There's going to be no further comment on this matter as we move forward into further news, but I felt compelled to make this thing, as the makers of this film have said. Now, team, stay safe, stay free, and we'll see you again real soon.